Welcome to these lectures about children living under time of war and crisis. My name is Helen Christie. I'm a psychologist, and I've been working with children exposed to abuse, to violence in my own country, and I've worked very much in war-affected countries with children and grown-ups who live under extreme stress or in actual wartime. Now in Ukraine, many children and families are living under major stress, and some have also experienced quite serious traumas. So on behalf of mental health and human rights, I've been asked to make a series of lectures about children, how they react and how we best can assist them. So together with some colleagues that will come in later and present themselves, we have made this into 7 parts. First, an introduction, and where we are talking in general how children react to trauma and major stress situations. And then we go deeper into each level of childhood, the 0 to 3, the 3 to 12, and the 12 to 18. So my colleagues will also assist and give lectures about what's specific about these stages. And then we will talk about how parents best can assist their children, and what we as helpers can do for helping the parents to help their children. And then we will also talk about how can the school and the teachers be of help for the young people when they are living under such major stress. And least, we will also talk about, as helpers, we sometimes get burned out because we are listening to such heavy stories, we are experiencing trauma ourselves or loss, and it is important for a helper to also take care of herself. So that's the last part. So, but we start now with the introduction. We somehow differ between living under major stress, which I think all children in Ukraine do nowadays. There is anxiety, uncertainty, it's separation and sorrow because it's a lot of losses. There's big changes in the daily life. Many people are fleeing not only abroad but also inside Ukraine. And there is also for children the very strange feeling that the grown-ups are not behaving like they used to do. So it's a lot of stress for, I think, almost all children in Ukraine at these times. But then there is also someone who are experiencing trauma events. And being exposed to trauma events has some specific reactions. It's an overwhelming feeling. It's a lot of confusion. It's that sometimes, in theory, they say that sometimes the most scary thing is not only what you see, what you experience from outside, but that you don't recognize yourself. You feel you are different, you behave differently. So let's go into the trauma part a bit. The definition, the very definition of trauma is that it's being exposed to an external event. In that way, it's different from the concept of crisis, because crisis can be something in your personal life that's different from you, or you and me react differently to what we experience as a crisis, but an external event that would be serious for almost everybody, that has the element of a threat, of physical or psychological, a threat towards physical and psychological integrity, or that you are witnessing to someone close to you being exposed. So I think many children also are not traumatized because they have directly experienced trauma, but they have been witnessing something happening to their parents or to their siblings or their friends or grandmother or whatever. And that is also seem to have the same impact as if you have been exposed yourself. So how do we react when we are exposed to trauma? Janina Fisher used to say that trauma survivors have symptoms instead of memories. We don't always carry clear memories of what we have experienced, but we get a lot of different symptoms. It can be all kinds of symptoms, from depression, from psychological symptoms to physiological symptoms. So, and the trouble is, in a way, that it doesn't have, it's not specific for trauma. I mean, you get depression from other things as well. And you get stomach pain, or you get social anxiety or whatever from other things. So it's similar to many other stressors. We usually say that some normal reactions to trauma is that you have these physical complaints. You have, in children, very often separation anxiety, sleeping difficulties, increased aggressive behavior and angry feelings. You have constant worry about possible danger. You see that the children are alert, they are looking for danger. They lose some learned skills. That's a very important and very significant reaction, that you see that children somehow go back in what they have learned about how to speak. They start bubbling like they were babies, or they lose their speech, their words, or they start bedwetting again, etc. So they lose acquired skills. You can see sometimes a withdrawal from other people, but also from activities that they used to enjoy, and lack of interest or feelings about anything. They seem somehow indifferent. And they seem to be restless and not being able to choose or to complete an activity. And they have trouble concentrating. So for instance, teachers and in school, you will see there are a lot of learning problems connected. We usually say that trauma consequences are mostly into three categories. It's the re-experience, that you don't only memorize what you have experienced, but that you seem to relive it. It can be flashbacks that is caused by triggers. I will talk more about what we mean by the word trigger, reminder. And it comes very often back in during the night, in your dreams, in your nightmares. It's one kind of re-experiencing. And then you have somehow the opposite of re-experiencing. You have the avoidance. You don't want to remember, you don't want to talk about it, you don't want to see anything that resembles it. You don't want to get near places where it happened, etc. And then you have the third category, which I'm also going to talk more about, which is the hyperarousal, that you are more activated in any way. You are easily irritated, you can't fall asleep, you are startled, etc. We differ between PTS, which is post-traumatic stress reactions, which is normal, and PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. Because if it lasts longer than 6 months, if it's very severe reactions, and if it increases, then we say perhaps it has developed into a PTSD. But the reactions I have talked about so far, the re-experience, the avoidance, the hyperarousal, is not necessarily a psychological disorder. It's normal reactions to abnormal circumstances. So I said we will go deeper into this, but we have to look for age-specific reactions. We have to see that the reactions in babies in 0 to 2 or 0 to 3 are much more connected to attachment, their attachment system. They are starting clinging, there are separation anxiety, they have lost the little capacity they have to regulate themselves. You can see eating problems, sleeping problems, etc. And into the next stage, preschool children, you also see this clinging and separation anxiety and food and sleeping problems, but you will also see that their capacity for play is changed. Some become more passive and helpless, and also for these children you see that acquired skills are reduced. In school children, you will also see that their play is being changed. You get a lot of repetitious play, that they repeat again and again what they have experienced. It's not abnormal. We know from daily life that if you take a child to the dentist, they go home and they play that they are the dentist with their doll. So repetitious play is not dangerous, but it can be very rigid and not with any variation. And you can see more aggression and more restlessness in the school children, and that they have learning problems. But you also sometimes they experience and they express their trouble by having somatic explains. My stomach hurt, my head, I have headache, and very not concrete but very diffuse somatical pain. In teenagers, you have the very classical PTS symptoms. For some, you have inappropriate sexual behavior, especially if they have been exposed to sexual abuse during war or been witnessing this. And then you have the guilt and shame, nightmares, and impulsivity. I'll just talk a bit more about play because it's a very big interest for me to see how, because play is such an important part of children up to 12. The play is where we explore the world, where our imagination is unfolding itself. Play is also where we experiment, but play is also that we process what we have been through. So play is the most valuable natural capacity that a child has. But unfortunately, the most valuable resource is also the one most vulnerable. It's valuable and vulnerable. And for some children, you see that the capacity to play can be totally lost. They can't play anything anymore. I have seen a lot of refugee children who have lost really their capacity to play. Or the next level, they do play, but they play rigidly and repetitious and play out hopelessness and it's little fantasy in their play. It's very just repeating what they have seen or experienced. And then the next, a bit better level, is that they play with fantasy. They play with trying out solutions, but it's very aggressive and revenge play. You see a lot of children. I used to work in Gaza, and I saw a lot of children playing war. And then you see also that sometimes children are able to play with fantasy, rescue motives, that someone is there to comfort them, etc. So that you see very much in ordinary children when they have been to hospital, or that they somehow process what they have been through by giving to the dolls or to each other in role play what they needed and didn't get, perhaps. So this is important to have to be aware of what do you see in the children's play. So I'll talk a bit about trauma and our brain. We call it the triune brain. Sometimes we explain to the children it's like a fist. Like this is the old brain, where our survival brain that we have similar to animals. This is the emotional brain, here the yellow part, the feeling brain. And the green brain is our thinking brain. And when we explain it towards children, we say that somehow when we have been traumatized, our thinking brain is not connected anymore. So it's the survival system, the alarm system, and our total emotional reaction that is dominating. We say that we have a sort of alarm systems that puts us into either fight, flight, or freeze. And that we have together, we have similar reaction to animals. We either we attack back, or we flee, or if that is not possible, then we freeze. And we make ourselves clear or ready for action. We say that when we experience danger, our brain and our body automatically work together in many ways through the alarm system and in the feeling part and in the survival part. That's what I just mentioned. The thinking brain is not included. It's if it gets shut down in a way. And you know, being ready to fight or flight is that if our breathing is very short and we go a lot of blood into our muscles, we are ready to fight. But we also we can also, if that is not possible, we freeze. But this is still a sort of hyper alert state. And if that is not possible either, we go into a sort of playing dead, being quite hypotonic. Like you can see that in animals. You know, you can see how they play dead when in big danger. And some of the same reactions, the shutdown reaction, can also be seen in both children and grown-ups. We have a metaphor that we call the window of tolerance. It describes actually how activated we are. If we are in the middle here, in the window between the two lines, we are awake, we have energy, we have the capacity to concentrate, we can learn new things, we can tolerate different emotions. But when you get hyper alert, when you get overactivated, a sympathetic activation in the fight-flight position, you can't really think, you can't really learn anything, you can't tolerate the feelings you have. It's outside your window of tolerance. So this is to somehow give you a picture of how we escalate between overreaction and underactivating. When we shut down, when we freeze, when we really play dead, then it's underactivation. So we use this picture or this metaphor also to do some psychoeducation, both with grown-ups and with children, and say that what we need to do is to help you regulate down. You have to be able to find methods how to calm yourself when too much activated. And then we will come back to how you use breathing, how you use muscle relaxation and different methods in order to calm down, to go down in the window of tolerance. And sometimes if people are numb or frozen, you have to activate them. You have to wake them up. So you have to regulate up if they are too. And then eventually you have to increase the window of tolerance so that you can tolerate being a bit scared, etc. What causes this state? It's not only during the trauma, it's also when you are triggered, when you have a reminder. And reminder could be an external sensory exposure, like something you see. You have been, for instance, exposed to soldiers, and whenever you see a man in a uniform, it's like you are back and you are overactivated again. Or it can be taste, or it can be some sounds, or it can be something in the other person's face that sometimes reminds you. But it can also be just your own inner state. I remember a girl said that running was difficult because then her heart started beating very fast and her breathing was very fast. And then she was reminded of how it was when she had to run from granates in the street. Sometimes we use also another metaphor, which is called the inner wall. I've tried to make a drawing here. I don't know if it makes sense. But, usually we know very clearly what is in the present time and what was in the past. And there I can take memories from my past. Memories, if you ask me about what happened to you last summer, I have some what we call sequential memories that I can take back. And I can tell you, what happened. Memories of trauma are organized differently in our brain. It's fragmented. It's not coherent. And triggers, like for instance a sound that sounds like a bomb or like an explosion, somehow crosses the wall between present time and past time. So it comes in as a fragment that somehow makes you think it's happening now. So in order to assist people who have been traumatized, we have to do a lot of stabilization exercises in order for them to feel, to get the inner wall thicker, so that they can differentiate whether that happened in the past, now I'm in the present, so they don't get confused. I have, together with some colleagues, made a manual called Manual for Stabilization and Skills Training After Traumatic Events. You can download it for free. It has a lot of good exercises. It was not actually developed during a war. It was a big massacre in Norway where 67 young people were shot on an island. A terrorist attack. And we had to work with these young people afterwards, and then we made this manual. So I made this as I've included this in this lecture for you to have some place where you can try to find some exercise that you think could be useful. It's about triggers, it's about sleeping problems, it's about concentration problems. It's not about talking through the trauma. It's about how to help people get more control over their reactions. Welcome back. We have talked about how trauma affects our psychological well-being, but I wanted also to say some very short about the opposite. And it was because I was working in Gaza, and I was teaching about how children were affected by traumas. And it was in a very troublesome time in Gaza. And my surprise was not that children were affected by the trauma, but my surprise was, why aren't even more children even more damaged by living in these circumstances? I couldn't really understand. And I thought, some of them are still playing, some of them are doing schoolwork very well, some of them have good relationship to their parents and siblings. And I thought it must be something else inside our human psychological functioning that is the opposite. And then I met this concept, resilience. Resilience doesn't mean that it's only inside a person. It's some characteristics about our constitution, our robustness, or our previous experiences that makes us more or less vulnerable. But it's also, resilience is really a concept about an outcome, that you have a positive outcome despite having been exposed to very serious matters. So it's factors inside a person, it's factors in the family, it's factors in the society and in the culture. We have a concept called the protective shield, which is that for children, it is sometimes not the event, but whether there is a protection present. Whether we know from literature that under Second World War, that the children sitting in the basement on their mother's lap when the London was under bombing attack, they were less damaged than those who were separated from their parents and sent to the countryside. So for children, that you are here to protect me, even if it's bombing outside, it means the most, actually. And And if there is no one there, it affects the attachment system and the basic trust in the world, actually. So some of the resilience factors that we can influence, and some of them we can influence, some we cannot. The cognitive capacity is nothing that we really can influence, but we know that children with a good cognitive capacity and with an easy temperament are more protected. But also skills like creativity, like that they have a feeling of coping, that there is a feeling of meaning and coherence, and what we call internal locus of control, that you have the feeling that there is something that I can influence. I have an internal locus of control. The control is inside me, not for everything, but for something. And we know also that children in families and in their network who has where there is a good relationship before the trauma starts, where there is structure and predictability, where there is rituals and limits, and where there is some feeling of that we belong together and shared values in the society. When I worked in Gaza, I worked together with a professor from Finland, and she said play, dream, and rituals are the three most valuable factors that can protect children. So when you work with traumatized children, do not only look for how they have symptoms and reactions of trauma, but do also look for the resources. What kind of skills does this child have? What is the interest of this child? Is there friends here? Do they have a group that they feel they belong to? Do they have activities that they still like? Because coping, feeling of mastery and coping is stress reducing and stabilizing. And feeling of mastery and coping also creates a better learning position. I said in the beginning that we are going to give specific lectures about each stage of the development, and that is because I've been very much concerned about that we very often talk about trauma as something similar when it happened, because it's not only the trauma, but it's what was the developmental task for that child in that period of life that was disturbed in a way. So I made a sort of developmental model where I put, the different ages on the left side. What are the natural maturity level at how do children meet danger at different levels, and then some resilience factors at different age stage, and then what was the developmental task that the child should master during that period that could have been disturbed. And I'm just going to do this briefly because the films that will follow will go deeper into each stage. So for the little child, 0 to 2, I've called it here, perhaps I should say 0 to 3. I think when a little child meets danger, a high sound or something, they look at their parents to see whether this is dangerous or not. We call it social referral, checking. For instance, I remember when the tsunami was in Thailand, and you went back, some families went back, and they were asked to report what was happening. The grown-ups or the bigger children could tell when the wave come in and what they saw. The small children knew exactly where the mother or father had been in the room, how they looked in the face. So for children, it's what we call social referral, whether the grown-ups seem disturbed and this is dangerous. That is what is most dangerous, scary for the child. The developmental task in this stage is actually, as I have earlier said, it's the attachment, it's imitation. When you talk to a baby or a toddler, it's you imitate the face, you explore, and you start by being able to take the perspective of the others. So if I point to a toddler, 2 or 3 year old, he will not look at my finger, he will look at where I point, the thing I point at. That we call that they can take the perspective of the other. So if trauma, if a 0 to 3 year old is exposed to trauma, we think that one of the risk factors is that you can have an attachment disorder, you can have an insecure attachment, clinging, or you can have this disorganized behavior that doesn't really know where to seek when in danger. And they have what we call regulation disorder. It's easy to calm them down. It's not easy to calm them. It's difficult to calm them down. It's difficult to make them fall asleep. It's difficult to get them to eat regularly. So that is especially for the youngest. And then you have the early childhood and the childhood 6 to 12, where this play is such an important developmental task, because play helps them also to start self-regulating and to think what is behind. Mentalization means to think what's behind behavior. So we see that during the period, if I take the group 3 to 12, you see that the emotional regulation, being able to calm themselves down, to play, to mentalize, and to feel this internal locus of control, this self-efficacy that I master, can be really affected. And the older they get, the more you can go into a social behavior and mistrust to adults and mistrust to oneself and others, because in that period, I think you all know, if you meet a girl 10 to 12, what's the most important thing for her? It's to be similar to others. It's to have this peer identification. And that family is still very important, but they seek out to have friends. To have friends is so important in that period of time. So if this period, the developmental tasks in this periods are disturbed, you easily get this more asocial behavior and mistrust. And then in the adolescent time, in youth, then you should be able to practice emotional self-regulation when confronted to danger, to see whether is this dangerous, to discriminate, is this dangerous or not, and to make some plan. And you should have been able to develop a sort of internal locus of control and some kind of independence under peacetime, I mean. And then you start, the developmental task is to start with this making new intimate relationships, and you are able to find your own identity, and we call it individuation and autonomy, but still related to your family. So it's this balance between autonomy and individuation and belonging. And then during, and I remember very much working with children at this age in Bosnia during the war in Bosnia, that from 12 they were so much concerned about who to be punished for the war crimes, how to get justice for what is happening now. This was on their agenda. And they also was worried about future. So that is part of, it's an important part of being an adolescent, is that you start wondering and working with these concepts of justice, moral, and what am I going to be, plan for the future. And if this is disturbed by trauma, you very, very often get a poor planning skill. Some of the youth actually, in literature, it's described as they don't have the capacity to think future at all. So you have to help them somehow start imagining that there is a future. Lack of emotional awareness. They don't really, if they are disturbed in this phase of life, this awareness of what I feel, what is me, and what's different from others, can be disturbed. You can have very sexualized behavior, and you can have a fragmentation of your life history, in a way, your narrative of your own history. Sometimes you also see that this concentration about moral and justice and who should be responsible and who should be punished for what I can lead into radicalism and a more extreme political engagement in this period. That's one of the risk factors. So we'll end here. Then we will have one film for each of these periods, go deeper into what happens in that period, how do we see the reactions, and then how can we help and assist children. So our methods have to be according to the child's age and according to what kind of developmental task should be repaired. So, thank you. Hello, we are come to the fourth part of this this sessions of seminars. We have talked about the developmental model, and then we have gone into each stage, 0 to 3, 3 to 12, and now we have come to talk about the stage of adolescence. How is it to be an adolescent in time of war and emergency? I wanted to say this, the overview of this lecture is to say what happens to us normally, what is the normal development during adolescent time, what happens to our brain, to our body, to our relationships, and what are the most core developmental tasks during this period, and can they be disturbed by being exposed to trauma during this period. What are the most common reactions when exposed to major stress and trauma reactions? It might be some repetition here, that you have heard this before, if you have heard all the different parts before, but we think that repeating some of the main points is good. And then I will try to say something about good coping strategies during this period of time. So let's talk a bit about what happens normally. What is it that happens between 12 and 18? It's we all know it's big changes in our body. We grow and we get female or male markers. It's a lot of hormones that are operating in the body. We need, as young people, we need much more sleep, for instance, and that is hard because you are used to, you don't want to go to bed early, so you are staying up late in the night, and then you are tired all the day in the morning, and then you should go up to school at regular time, and you have all this. This is normal conflicts in a family with young people. But it's not only the body that changes, it's huge changes in our brain during this period of time. It's called a sort of reorganizing how the brain is structured. That is a good thing because it's also a time for repairing things that wasn't really going well during previous time. But the main change in the brain is that the prefrontal cortex, where we do the logical thinking, the planning of the future, that we see the consequences of our action, that doesn't develop during this period of time. But the emotional brain has a large expansion during this period of time. So it's not only the hormones, it's also actually the brain that makes young people be more emotional, more unstable, more danger-seeking perhaps, or more experimenting, and they don't really have the capacity to think about the consequences of their actions. That comes actually not before we are around 25. So this imbalance between very much emotions going on and very little control and planning and consequences is, why this period is especially vulnerable for strong impressions. So our feelings and emotions changes, but also our social belonging. I think that young people are so concerned about friends. They are so dependent upon friends. And friends' opinion of them matters more than their parents' opinion upon them. So it's very big changes actually that happens during these periods of time. And when they grow older, they know more about how to regulate these strong emotions and how to regulate balance between the friends and the peers and their family and other relationships. And they become more concerned about planning for long-term planning, for future, for professional, etc. So the developmental task during this period is, it is finding your identity. It's who am I? Who am I when I'm with my family? Who am I when I'm with my friends? Who do I belong to? Because, our family, we haven't chosen our family, but now we are in a period of life where we choose who we want to belong to. So this is a big challenge and big developmental task to find out where do I belong? And how do I balance this being independent? I want to be independent, feel I'm myself, feel I can manage, and still be dependent upon my family and my close relationship. Then this sexuality starts and the intimate relationships and how to find out how to orient oneself and how to feel that I'm good enough. And then this is also a developmental task, is actually to start this preparation for the future, for your professional life. And it's difficult and it feels like a big demand upon many young people. And then it's what we called, when we talked about the developmental model, this is also a period where values are important. I have to choose what kind of values should be dominating in my life. What do I think about justice? What do I think about social responsibilities? What kind of do I want to have a religious kind of life? Do I want to have a political view? Do I have some idealistic values about climate or about human rights, etc.? So this is a very, very important developmental task in this period of life. We said that during major or traumatic stress, we have this activating, this tense feeling, this overactive. We talked about the window of tolerance, that you easily get overactivated or underactivated. We have this avoidance behavior that you don't want to talk about it. You don't have the words for talking about what you experience, and you have this re-exposure. So how can we meet this? How can we assist young people to sort of help them fulfill their developmental tasks? And how can we help them through this stage? I'm aware that I've talked very much about post-traumatic stress. And when we talk about Ukraine, we are not post, we are not after the trauma. You are still living in it. So I've been inspired by a man called Hopeful, who has been writing about how can we support young people and help them re-enter their developmental path so they can fulfill their developmental tasks. And he says, of course, when you're living under stress, there is always safety first. You have to feel safe in order to develop. So that means, we will go into each of these factors. So the young people need to feel safe. They need to learn something about self-regulation and how to calm themselves down. And then, more than ever, they need to feel this, what I called internal locus of control, or what he calls that you have the power to influence your situation. And And social support is also a very, very crucial factor that helps young people, but it's not only receiving social support, it's also giving social support towards others. Feeling that you are of use for someone. So both, the mutual support. And then they need some kind of activity or assistance to be able to start planning their future. It's not important if those plans becomes reality. It's just help them re-enter the capacity to think future, not to be pessimistic and think I don't have any future. Sometimes with young people we talk about future and I make them plan different kind of scenarios, not to find the right one, but to make them be engaged in, yes, there are several possibilities in my future. So let's see a bit about each of these factors. When we say safety first, we say, of course, it is about a physical safety. It's about knowing where to go if there is a danger. If there is a safe place somewhere, if there is a basement, or if there is a shelter. So, of course, knowing where to go in times of alarm or shooting, explosion, etc. is important that they know this. But it's also safety in routines, in structure, in school attendance, that the routines are not totally chaos, and that you have a structure during the day also makes you feel more safe and secure. So this structure and rhythm, routines are so important for the feeling of safety. And the other thing is help them self-regulate and calm down. And now we are going to do a demonstration. So I will invite Elizabeth to come up and I'll try to do some exercises with you that you can teach. And then I'm going to sit down together with you and I'll tell you what to do. And in this seminar we have put 3 exercises, but there will also be available other exercises that we will put online. Okay, the first one is a breathing exercise. So I'll ask you to sit comfortably and lower your shoulders and close your eyes. Imagine a square in front of you. And I want you to think that while you imagine the right side of this square, you breathe in while counting to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you imagine following the line on the top of the square to the left side. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you imagine the line on the left side downwards, breathing out. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you hold your breath while you take the weight. 1, 2, 3, 4, until you start again. 1, up, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, hold, 4. You can repeat that 3 times for yourself. I put in one who's not here, but that I like and had just came into my mind. Look at me at once. You can also think that when you inhale, you activate the body. When you exhale, you lower, you're calming your body down. So it's sometimes important to inhale more quickly and exhale more slowly. So sometimes we say, imagine that you look at, and then that you look at a leaf falling from a tree while you breathe out. And then wait before you breathe in. And breathe out. So actually that's the most easy exercise. But the square is also okay. So then I'll try to do a grounding exercise. Why is grounding important? It is important that when we are in stress, we sometimes lose contact with what we are on the ground, and we are in our head. And when we are in our head and not in our feet, we are easily more activated. So I want you to sit on your chair and feel your feet touching the ground. Stamp your left foot into the ground, and then stamp your right foot into the ground. Do it slowly, left, right, left, right, left, right. You feel the contact with the floor here? And then put your awareness to the thighs and buttocks in contact with the seat of your chair. Notice if your legs and buttocks now feel more present or less present than when you started focusing on your legs. And now move your focus to your spine. Feel your spine as your midline, and slowly try to somehow lengthen your spine. And notice if that affects your breath. Put your hands together. And then push your hands together and feel your strength. And release and pause. And repeat. And now move your focus to your eyes. Look around in the room. Find something that tells you you are here. Can you tell me a focus that you have chosen?
The plants.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the door.
You're here and now, and here you are safe. Notice this exercise affects your breathing, your capacity to be present, your mood, and your strength. And then there is a last exercise that I would like to demonstrate. This will take in when doing it with traumatized people, we use a bit longer time than I do now for demonstration purposes. But with this is called a muscular tension relaxation exercise, and I've done it many times with young people, with adolescents, and they prefer this one, in my experience, because it's concrete and it's not only relaxation, it's also strength. So start with focusing on your hands. Make a fist. Hold it for 5 seconds. Release. 10 seconds and then repeat. Really make a strong fist. Hold. And then relax. And notice, be aware of the difference between the release state and the tension state. And then move the focus to your arm. Pull your forearm towards your shoulder. Feel the tension in your upper arm. Make tension in the upper arm. Hold 5 seconds and release. And then, once again, hold and release. Stretch your arm out. Lock the elbow. Feel the tension in the triceps. Tense and release. And once again, tense and release. Focus on your face. Increase the tension in your forehead. Lift your eyebrows. Hold the tension and release. And once more, hold your eyebrows high and release. Can you imagine having a tension in your jaw? Bite. Keep the tension there for 5 seconds. Release. And focus then on your muscles in your neck. Bend your neck so that the chin, so that your cheek meets the fore part. Turn your head slowly to the left, and then bring it back to the center and release. And then turn it to the right and release. Focus your shoulders, lift them. Hold. Notice the tension in your shoulders and release. Notice the difference between holding and releasing. Focus on your shoulder blades, pull them back, increase the tension, and release. And repeat once more. Hold, release. Then again, stretch your back, sitting in a very upright position. Stretch, 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 and then relax. One more time. Relax. Can you try to increase your tension in your buttocks? Hold for 5 seconds and release. Once more. And then breathing and hold your breath in your stomach. And release. Again, tighten your stomach and release. Strengthen your legs. This time make your toes point. Stretch your legs. I feel the tension in your legs. Hold and release. Stretch the toes first forwards and release. And then take it up and make the toes point at you. And release. And this other foot, the same. And then again put your feet on the ground. Now I want you to scan your whole body. Does any part of the body feel tense? Remember forehead, jaws, neck, shoulders, arms, back, stomach, buttock, thighs, legs, feet. Scan it all, and if there are tension somewhere, then repeat the exercise that was directly focusing on that area. Good. Imagine that a relaxed feeling is spreading through your whole body. Your whole body feels warm, perhaps a little heavier, but relaxed. So how do you feel?
More present.
More present? Yes. It's an important lesson for all of us that when we get scared or stressed, something happens in our body, and you can change your feelings by changing your body. That makes you feel more mastery, more that you have more influence on your own, and that you are able to regulate some of that. Whenever you become tense, you have to be aware. Where in my body do I notice, and is there something I can do to feel the difference between tension and relaxation? Okay, thank you. So we are back to Hopeful's 5 factors. The one was safety, the other was calming. And his third was this about influence your own situation. That could be like this that we have done now. But it is also to have influence upon your own situation. Could be very small things, but that you feel that you are influencing. I remember when working in Macedonia with the Bosnian refugees, that we said to one of the girls, what do you want to happen? And she said, I want it to be peace in Bosnia. It's not easy if you are a 12-year-old girl to make peace in Bosnia. But when we asked her, is there something that you want to happen in the next week? And she said, yes, I want to go to the swimming pool. And we said, okay, let's make a plan. how can you influence that this is going to happen in your life? Someone is taking you to the swimming pool next week. Let's make a concrete plan. That's, a small thing, but it's helping them to feel that they regain a sort of influence, internal locus of control in their life. Which it's important for all of us. It's important for us because trauma is also, among many things, it's also a feeling of helplessness and that you haven't influenced what is happening to you. So to take back the feeling that I'm not only someone whose things are happening to, I'm also someone who can influence something. And the Hopeful's fourth factor was this receiving and giving social support. Belonging to a group, I think if possible in the city or wherever you live, is if it's possible for young people to feel a belonging. It could be in the school, in the classroom, it could be in an activity like football or other activities, but that they belong together with someone, because friends and peer relationships are so important in this period of life. And I also remember that I remember one research about Kurdistan, where a doctor examined children who was in the mountains because they had fled from the war activities, and he found out that all of them had a lot of PTS symptoms. And then he examined them later, 3 months later, and the boys seemed to have recovered automatically or normally, but the girls still had a lot of symptoms. And his explanation actually was that the boys got important tasks to do. They had to be spiders, they had to find out where the enemy was, they had to find wood for making the family warm, but the girls had no duties. The girls were sitting passive in the tents. So what he explained was that the element of required helpfulness, that you feel that you are important, that you have a duty that somebody needs, is also very, very important if you can find some kind of tasks that make the young person feel important and helpful and that he is needed or she is needed. And then social support is also about sharing. It's about sharing emotions, it's about sharing thoughts, sharing feelings, sharing activities. But the belongingness and the sharing is combined. And then the last that Hopeful emphasizes is this plans and hopes for the future. Sometimes we make small videos or small plays where they, I remember in Bosnia I made a sort of play where the young people were to say what will happen when there is peace in Bosnia. And one said, we will win the football, the world championship in football. And we made sort of number one, number two, number three, and they played, receiving the gold medal for football. And then they said, what do you think will happen in your own life? And some said they wanted to play a wedding, they wanted to sing the normal wedding songs, they wanted to make a scene where they received their diplomas from the school, etc. They wanted to play being professional lawyer or a doctor. So we had a lot of play about how to imagine the future. So discussing it, playing it, talking about it, telling each other dreams about the future. They don't have to be realistic, but that you are starting to think there is a future. It's so important, and it also could be in school that you write about the future. So these are the 5 factors that Hopeful says is important, especially in adolescent time. Thank you. Hello again. We have come to the part 5 in this package or these sessions. Some of you have heard the other parts first, and for you it will be some repetition here. But also some of you might hear this session as the first part, so that's why I think it's necessary to say something of the core elements. This session is not about trauma treatment, it's about why parents are so important and how they can support their children. And how can we as helpers help parents to be that support? So the first point is about what actually determines whether a child is traumatized or not. Why is parents so important? And we are going to discuss the concept of protective shield. And then, secondly, we are very shortly again saying something about what are the common reactions to trauma and what are the reactions at different age levels. And then I will present as the third point a model called the STOP model, which are the key elements in helping children in crisis. But first, the concept of protective shield. It's actually used by, I think it was invented, I don't know, but it is used by the one who's director of the National Institute for Child Trauma Center in US. His name is Robert Pines, and he says that if you can see on the slide, T stands for the trauma, the F stands for actually for parents. It's in Norwegian, I'm sorry. And the B stands for the child. But the thing to remember is being exposed to a trauma does not necessarily make a child traumatized. To be traumatized is a description of the reaction, not of the event. So you can be exposed to a traumatic situation without being traumatized, because you have the feeling of that someone is here to protect me. Sometimes I use an example from my own life, which is not a very traumatic life, actually, but I was driving a car with my 3 children in the back seat and a little cat, and then I fell asleep. And I crashed into the car in front of us, and my whole car was destroyed. It couldn't be repaired afterwards. Out of the car, all 3 children and the cat and me were climbing, and all of us were safe. No one was hurt. And then my daughter said to me, "Oh, mother, I'm so happy you are not damaged or hurt." And I thought, oh, but she shouldn't take care of me. I'm the one should be taking care of her. So I said, well, the most important thing is that you're not hurt. And she looked at me as if I was the stupidest mother and psychologist she has ever heard about. And she said, you must understand that if I got hurt, you would be there and follow me in the ambulance. But if you were hurt, who should take care of me then? So for her, it was obvious that having a mother or someone to protect her and to follow her, even if she had been wounded, was more important than not being wounded, because the danger was really to feel unprotected. So that's what Robert Pines called that the child is not traumatized when the protection shield, the mother, the father, the caregiver, someone is there to protect me. So we call it traumatization when the child is exposed to a trauma and the parent are not physically or mentally available. It could be the parents. Here I use the term parent, but it could be any caregiver. It could be the teacher, it could be the grandmother, it could be an aunt, the caregiver. So the child is traumatized when the exposure is without any protection. And of course, the worst kind of traumatization is the last one here, when the trauma and the protective person is the same. The threat is coming from the person that should protect you, as in domestic violence, for instance. Then the child is really, really hurt. Robert Pines says that for the child, when the protective shield breaks, then anything can happen. Then the fear is all over. Anything can happen to me because I'm not protected by anything here. So all kinds of fantasies also start blooming. What could more happen when this could happen and no one was here? So we have a lot of fantasies also when children have been exposed to real trauma and they have felt this unprotected state. Sometimes you see fear fantasies. Robert Pines also says that three kinds of fantasies. It's fear fantasies, it's revenge fantasies, and it's rescue fantasies. So sometimes they have this Batman or Spider-Man or somebody came and rescued me, or they have some kind of imagining that they have themselves some overnatural forces, strength. So you could see a lot of kind of things that you think this couldn't be real, really? So has it happened? And you doubt the child's story because it's mixed with some fantasies. But the story and the event can be very real and the fantasies are following. So the PTS reaction in general are this re-experiencing that it's coming back as if it is happening again. It's increased activation, that you are irritable, you are easy to get startled, you have difficulties in concentrating, difficulties in sleeping, and you have this avoidance, not talking about, not wanting to hear about, not wanting to be remembered. And sometimes that is difficult for parents because they want to calm their children and talk about them, and I saw you were very scared, and the child tries to avoid talking about it. But we know that avoidance is not a very good thing, because avoidance can actually increase, so that you start by being afraid of a soldier, for instance, and then you become afraid of all kind of uniforms, and then you become afraid of all men, and you know it can grow into a sort of phobia. So you have to do a balance between calming and sheltering, and then also gradual exposure. And we differentiate between different ages, the clinging and separation anxiety, and the losing skills, etc., when the child is 0 to 3, and the play that is so disturbed and interrupted, and that you have to help the child start playing again, because play is such an important developmental task. It's not only for amusement, it's also, this is an important developmental task. And you have also, for some children, what we call the shutdown picture, that they become passive, silent, and they are most difficult to recognize because they don't bother anybody. They just sit still. So to find out and to see that reaction in children is very important, both for parents and for other caregivers, teachers, etc. And then in school, you will see that the anxiety and the is also disturbing the capacity for concentration, for remembering, for learning, etc. And then you have the reactions in the adolescents, where they overthink, they have concentration difficulties, they have thoughts about justice, who should be held accountable for this, aggression, and you also have a lot of losses, because sometimes we forget how important friends are to young people. I'll put in a little anecdote, because I was working in Bosnia, and we had an exercise where I asked the children to, on small cards, write about a friend they had lost. And they, in order for this not to be too overwhelming, I made the sentences and I said ... And they should just fill in some words. So it was, a good friend of mine was ... I lost my friend because of ... My friend was ... We used to do together ... What I feel now is ... So it should be not too overwhelming. But one of the girls started really to cry, very much crying. And she was overwhelmed. And and I said to her something about, because I wanted her to feel that she got some control back. And I said to her, do you know what would be good for you to do now? Because do you know why you cry so much? I'll tell you why. When we lose someone that we love so much as you loved your friend, we have a deep, deep, deep sorrow. And everybody calmed down, and it was silent like in the church. And then I said, sometimes when we are so sad, we know for ourselves what would be the best thing to do. And she said, yes, I want to go to the bathroom, please. And I said, yes, take a grown-up with you and go to the bathroom. And then I said to the rest of the group, and I said to her, come back whenever you feel ready for it. And then I said to the rest of the group, when we are as deep in sorrow as you saw Mira was now, what helps? And then they started to talk about coping strategies. I like going to cuddle with my cat. I like going to mother. I like listen to music. I like running. And they sort of helped each other finding good coping strategies, because we all feel this loss and feel that. So she wasn't ashamed of crying. She felt it was a sort of dignity when I said, this is what happens to us when we lose someone that is so close to us. So I sort of helped her feel a sort of dignity in the situation, and the other children helped her when she came back, that when I feel like you did, I do that, and I do that, and I think that helps, and I think that helps. So they got a sort of influence, mutual support, etc. Yeah. It was perhaps a little detour. I think when we talk about supporting children, we should also look into the resilience. I'll be very short. Just two, for me, important researchers, Antonovsky, who has looked upon who came out from the concentrating camps after war and managed well. What was their experience? What helped them? And he said his concept is sense of coherence, but he says that it is containing that the world need to be understandable. Cognitively, I understand what's happening here. It needs to be manageable. I know what to do, or I know where to go to get help. And it has to be meaningful. It has to give meaning, being something worthwhile. And the other one was Emmy Werner, who done research upon children living in the extreme poverty and chaos. And she said, yes, the 4 factors. It's whether there is structure and some clear rules in their lives, whether there is this feeling of internal locus of control and influence, whether they have something where they feel that they are skillful or that they master. It could be playing football, it could be playing chess, it could be hairdressing, it could be anything. And she also points out that life has to have meaning. So when one starts refugee camps, etc., one uses this, what we call the STOP model. And the STOP model, for me, is easy to remember because of the letters, that the S stands for structure. You have to have, S is S structure, that there is, like Emmy Werner said, that there is a structure in the child's life. A daily routine. When you go to bed, when you have your meals, what is the activities during the day. It's very, very important. It's very, very common that if you are an internal refugee or something, it's a bit chaotic. But to make a structure of the day makes the child feel safe and that their protective shield is restored. And the other thing is the T. Someone says that in refugee families or in families during wartime, it can become what they call a conspiracy of silence, that the grown-ups don't want to talk to children about what has happened because they want to somehow protect them from, and they think that the children hasn't been exposed to much, and the children want to protect their parents, so nobody talks about it. But every research says that being silent for a very long time and avoiding talking about what happened actually is making the re-experiencing, when you are not wanting to think about it, it comes back as invasion of your thoughts and your memories. So children need to talk about it. And they need also an explanation of why do you react that way, and why do mother cry during the night because she doesn't know where father is, and whatever. They notice the grown-ups' reaction, and they need to get an explanation of it. And then the O stands for organized play, because the play is many times so chaotic or rigid, and it has lost its capacity to play and symbolize, and using fantasy. You have to help them get organized activities. And then we have the P that stands for parental support. For us as helpers, we need to help the children, but actually, even more so, we need to give support to the parents. That is financial, material, physical support, but most of all, it's empathy and listening to them, and also make them understand that they are that important to their children, that they are the protective shield, that they are the ones who can make the child not traumatized, because even if it has been exposed to trauma. So we again need to be the protective shield of the parents, for them to be a protective shield for their children. Thank you. No, one is, yeah, just one more. The lesson learned from this lecture is children need parents to provide security and emotional support. They need explanation. They need predictability and structure. If you just have forgotten all the rest, just remember this. And parents need to understand how important they are. They need our support. And they need safe environment that gives them the empowerment and mastery and meaning of their life. Thank you. Welcome. We are going to talk about how to take care of myself as a helper in the light of encountering trauma and strong emotions. It's part 7 in this session sequence. I just wanted you to see a nice picture of this. Yeah. So it's meant to symbolize how we can support each other. The overview of this is to say something about that as a helper, our main resource is our capacity for compassion, for empathy. That's the main resource we have to build upon. But at the same time, this capacity for empathy and compassion is also that makes us most vulnerable. Human defenders, psychologists, social workers, or other helpers, empathy and engagement are the main motivation for our work, but it's also the core of our ability to be wounded at our work. So how can we last? How can we be there in the field and not and maintain professional and personal growth ourselves? Because if we just go in and use all our capacity for compassion and engagement and everything, we easily get burned out very quickly. And we need to last long. So in this lecture is 3 questions. It's to be aware what things triggers you most, what kind of things burdens you most, what kind of stories you hear or see, or what kind of circumstances in the long run burdens you most. And how do you notice that you are on the edge? You have signals that you are really on the edge of becoming burnout. How do you recognize that in yourself? And what do you think is helpful? Because we can't just give out, we have to get something in. We have to refill ourselves. In this session, I'm going to say, take a break, sit down, write. And then you have to stop the film. Because I'm not stopping waiting here, but you can stop the film. And you can write down what kind of exercises I show you. So the first, already now, reflection is to think about what triggers you most, what burdens you most in the situation or in the long run. It can be something that has some connection to your personal life. It can be, for instance, if you have children yourself, that the stories about children who are suffering is the most triggering. Or it can be that if you have had a separation, a loss in your life, that hearing about people who have lost their dear ones triggers you more than, for instance, your colleague. So it has to be, you have to be careful thinking about what kind of things triggers me. And stop the film, take 3 minutes, write down on a piece of paper what you notice, what you reflect upon, what triggers you. What do we mean by, as a helper, we can get hurt? There has been quite a lot of research about people who have been in the helping business for a long time and how they react. And they have developed several concepts that are somehow similar, but they have some nuances that makes them different. Sometimes we call something secondary traumatization, and sometimes you will hear the concept of vicarious traumatization, and sometimes you will hear people talking about burned out or compassion fatigue. They are similar in some ways, but I will also explain why we need all the 3 concepts, because they differ somehow. But just to say from the beginning that being a helper, doing something to help other people during war and stress and crisis is not only a burden, it's also very meaningful. It's also creates a passion for your work and creates a personal growth because it has meaning and it has purpose and you feel you can influence something. But in order for it to be a growth and not a burden or a hurt, who's responsible are we talking about here? In ordinary life, we would say it's the employer, it's your colleague group, and it's yourself. I don't know during your time in Ukraine during wartime how well organized your work is. But usually the employer is responsible for your working condition physically and also for your workload, your quantity of work. And that it should be, from the employer's side, some debriefing possibilities and some variation in your work. And some kind of support and refill. The colleagues are also very important, that you take the responsibility as a colleague to give support to your other colleagues and to ask for support. To share experiences, have good feedback processes. To have some kind of difference between when we work and when we have a break. And feeling that you are responsible with the others to create a good colleague atmosphere, company culture. And then there is an individual responsibility on all of us to self-observation, to be attentive and aware, and really recognize our own reactions. I speak of experience because I'm not very good at this, actually. And when I was younger, I was even worse. And my weak point was my back. And I was a lone mother with 3 children and bad economy. And every time the children went to their father, I was divorced, and every time the children went to their father, I somehow had a collapse in my back and was lying and had terrible pain. And every time I thought, oh, I knew. I have had these signals for many days now. So if I had observed it and taken it seriously previously, I could have avoided this collapse. So that's why I'm so concerned about being aware of the signals in time. But when we talk about these concepts, we talk about different dimensions in the helper. It's our emotions, it's our symptom and behavior, it's how our cognitive functioning, how cognitive style and our belief system can be affected, and how we manage being in a stress situation, and whether we find good coping skills. So I'll go through the concept that I've presented to you, and I'll try to explain them. When we talk about secondary traumatization, that is connected to listening to stories with strong traumatic content. And I've worked so much with rape and with sexual abuse of small children. And I really feel that some of these stories, even if they are 20, 30 years old, I still have a picture in my head. And I haven't, I mean, it's crazy because I haven't seen it. But I've heard the stories, and it's like I have some of the same symptoms as a patient can get, that you have a sort of invading picture in your head. So, secondary traumatization is connected to that you get some of the same reactions as a PTSD patient might have. That you have invading, intrusive images, that you have avoidance signs, you want to distance yourself, you don't want to hear about it, you don't want to read about it, and you have a sort of activated state of mind. You have easily startled, you are easily irritated, etc. So that your reactions resembles the main characteristics that a PTSD patient would have. And the concept of vicarious traumatization is more, it's not really this intrusive memories or intrusive pictures, it's more a cognitive influence that doesn't come from one story or one patient or one person, but it's more over time, this feeling of cognitive changes in you, that your feeling of who am I, what am I worth, what do I think of others. I become quite critical. I can become quite critical about both myself and others and think, what do they know? And sometimes you seem to lose your feeling of meaning of life and your view of reality. You get pessimistic, sometimes a bit cynical, and you don't think the world is a good place to be. So it's about your thinking. And here I've just described beliefs, but it is also affecting your cognitive capacity, your capacity for concentration, your capacity for memory. You forget things, you really can't concentrate and be effective in your work. And then you have this concept of burned out or compassion fatigue, which is sort of mix. It's both, it's called the cost of caring, that you feel exhausted and physically and mentally tired, that you feel empty, you lose your motivation, you devaluate yourself and others, and you have sort of more negative, you don't have all this empathy to give to others, so you have a more cynical or indifferent attitude towards your clients. You can feel depressed, boredom, hopelessness, and have sleep problems, and you can get sick. Actually, it's some research upon, for instance, cancer and serious illness that could be correlated to burnout symptoms. And the literature says that the vulnerable ones are nurses, physicians, other therapists, other helpers with a high capacity for empathy, feeling of pain of the victim, strong desire to relieve wounds, and high degree of exposure. And I would possibly add also high demands upon yourself. Perhaps unrealistic demands upon yourself. So I want you to stop the film and reflect upon this. How do you notice that something you're working with is overloading you? Is it physical signs? Is it thoughts? Is it feelings? Is it actions? And what do you think your colleagues notice? Perhaps you don't notice it yourself, but perhaps your colleagues notice that you are so much more quick to get irritated, for instance, frustrated, so little tolerance. And also think a bit about what you need from your colleagues when you feel like this. And what kind of help from yourself, from a colleague, and from your employer do you need? So how do I understand my signals, both in the situation and in the long term? And if you are listening as a group now, try to do this as a group exercise. Along which dimensions? In the body, in the emotions, in the cognitive field, or in the social relational field? Or is it other changes that you should be aware of? I didn't talk really, I'm going to talk a bit more about what I mean by social relational reactions, because very often it means that you withdraw. You withdraw from your colleagues, you withdraw from your friends, you want to be alone. So stop the film. Either you go and make a reflection and write down on the paper for yourself, or you do go into a group and discuss and exchange experiences. And we will go a bit further into details about all these dimensions. Yeah, we talked a bit about workload as one of the risk factors, and the high demands on yourself, and perhaps unrealistic demands on our own abilities. Because the engagement and motivation and empathy is high in helpers, the capacity for realistic goals are sometimes not clear enough. That you set yourself too high goals, you set yourself too high standard for what should be the result of my work. You get very frustrated because you meet some people that you are not able to help, and you take it upon yourself. So that's the personal risk factors, that these demands and these unrealistic thoughts are too high. But there can be also risk in your surroundings. That your workload, and I've in these days also spoken to people in Ukraine that are working with traumatized children, and I hear that they have so long days and so many hours a day and so many cases a day that I think, please, please, please slow down. Because even if you think the need is so high, if you're gonna last, you can't have this workload for a long, long time. It's a risk factor also if you feel that you don't have any influence upon your situation, that your employer, the school, whatever your leader is just giving you much more and more and more demands. And if you feel that you don't have any support from your colleagues and not any feedback, and you feel isolated, this is very, very much a risk factor. So again, I go back to what should we be aware of? Where do the signals come? I said in me it came in the back, but it also came that I realized that my children at home, when they complained about something they didn't like having happened during the day in school, I got irritated because I was working with so much traumatized children that I thought they should not come with these tiny details. And when you get that daily harassment is not something you bother with, you get irritated by being exposed to them, you know that's a sort of signal. So being aware, where are my signals coming first? So let's go in a bit deeper into what kind of physical reactions should you be aware of. It could be muscle pain, that you feel tense in your shoulders, in your some people wake up in the night and find themselves biting shoulders, neck, or it could be inside your body, so your stomach, pain, changes in your appetite, etc. It could be headaches, dizziness, it could be high blood pressure, etc. So it could be many kind of physical signals that you should be aware of. Or it could be changes in your emotional state, that you feel more stressed, irritable, what I said, a shorter tolerance for everyday problem, mood swings, and that's the that you're feeling down, or perhaps that you are a bit more insensitive and feeling a bit cold. I don't care. I really don't manage to care anymore. It's a terrible feeling, actually, when you know that usually I consider myself to be an ordinary empathic person. And now you tell me this story and I don't feel any reactions. It's a terrible feeling, actually. And you could have these cognitive changes, that you have shorter concentration span, you have weakened your capacity for focusing, you have gaps in your memory, and you have more cynical, pessimistic, suspicious, and more self-critical attitude. That's cognitive changes. And you can have social signals, withdrawal, isolation, more judgmental in general, not only towards certain people, but in general. And you don't want to get involved in other people's problems. And it could be other possible behavioral changes. Changes is the key word here. That you sleep differently, you eat differently, you drink differently, etc. So why should we be this self-aware? Isn't it to be very self-conscious, to take oneself too serious? Other people have much more problems than I have. Should I be so concerned about myself? And I think that's the main trap we fall into, that other people's problems seem to be so large, so my problem should be ignored. But if you're going to last for a long time, you have to be aware so that you can take your precautions early enough. So what helps? What are the good factors? It's ordinary good things. It's good health, recreation, meaningful relationships, creativity, feeling of influence. It's that you have a worth and dignity, that you are able to talk nicely to yourself and give yourself credit for what you do, not always criticizing yourself and saying what you can't do. That you get some support and help from others, and that you feel that you're part of something, that you are not alone, that you're part of a whole. The trouble is that we always actually know what helps, and then we don't use it. We feel too tired to seek actually what we know helps. That's a paradox. And very, very often noticing that myself, that I know that just for now I should pick up my telephone, call some friends, or go for a walk, or look at something nice, or listen to some beautiful music, and then I sit in front of the television and I don't do anything that gives me any new energy. So it's a big paradox that we know and we don't use what we know. Yeah, what helps? It helps sometimes to have this knowledge, to be aware, and to know yourself. This is my weak point. This is what burdens me. This is where I get my signals from. And this is where I can get support. I know that even if I see that the need around me is so big, I am able to set boundaries, to see I can't do more than this. And that you have some protection strategies. It is also important, and I've tried to talk to some of the Ukrainian psychologists that I have contact with in Ukraine. Could you possibly think of doing some variation in your work? Perhaps you shouldn't see clients all day. Perhaps you also should give supervision to colleagues, or give lectures, or have a time for reading, so that you have a sort of variation in your work, not only doing the same thing again and again. And try to have also a private life, to have some social connection that is not connected to the work. Yeah, and exercises, creative work, etc. And make a nice meal, make nice food, rest, all these things that we know helps. Yeah, try to have to write down and see what do I know helps me. Yeah, it's also many factors that could be done if you are in an organization that has some structure. We have mentioned some of them previously. And also counseling is a good thing, because sometimes it's not that you get new advices or new knowledge, it's that you share with someone. That you get some individual guidance or group training, but also that you share with your colleagues, you give and receive support from And perhaps also I would say that sometimes our compassion is not enough. We also, in order to last longer, we need to have some kind of cognitive curiosity. Why do people react this way? How are people changed? How can people find new ways, etc.? And then the last part is really, really to know what gives you energy. I've mentioned something, but I will also mention a model called Basic PH. It's developed from a group in Tel Aviv, and especially I have met the leader of this group called Ofra Ayalon, who says that they have studied all the literature about what helps people during stressful time. What are the best coping strategies? And she says, and I very much use this both for myself and in my work, to say what seemed to help people come through stressful times is if they are aware of a good belief and value system. If they have a religious or a political or a human right or whatever, but that they have a sort of knowing that these are my values. And remind yourself, the reason why I do this is because my values is in this work. And then the A in this basic stands for your affects. You need to have access to your own feelings, that you actually recognize what you're feeling, and that you are able to own them and to accept them, tolerate them. Yes, I get a bit irritated when I hear about details. Yes, I am able to put words to it without being judgmental towards myself. I am also able to regulate my affect. When I get upset, I know some methods to calm down. I'm able to express my feelings. I'm able to share them. I'm able to have this self-compassion. That also seems to have a protective factor. And then the S is for social support in all kinds, talking about, sharing, and sharing with your colleagues, having guidance, having debriefing, but also having social contact with somebody outside your work, as we talked about. The I is perhaps the most surprising in a way, that this team said that art in all kinds of art, imagery is fantasy, symbols, art, music, pictures, books, everything has this healing effect upon us. And then the C stands for the cognition, that you understand, that you learn something new, that you develop your cognitive function, that you really feel that now I've acquired some new skills. That really helps you, and you understand the circumstances you're working in. And the PH stands for all kind of bodily exposure, physical well-being. It can be relaxation, it can be yoga, it can be exercising, it can be running. Whatever, but taking care of your body. And the exercise connecting to this is actually, if you look upon the basic PH, the belief system, affect, social, imagery, cognition, physical, can you find your favorite strategy? What do you always do? Do you always cry or express your emotions? Or do you always call your friends? Or do you always listen to music or go to a religious ceremony? Find your favorite strategy. And that's good. You shouldn't change that. If it works for you, you should use it. But, it's a but, because sometimes we use our favorite strategy and only that. And we need to have a big variety of cognitive coping strategies. Very often when I've worked with families, the fathers, the stereotype is that fathers say they do exercise, they run, and mother says, I call my friends, I talk to my girlfriends. So the one uses PH and one uses social. But try to expand. Try to see, okay, now I know my favorite. Can I is there any of these coping strategies that I don't use, that I haven't thought of would be a good idea? To listen to music, to go to art exhibitions or whatever, to go into the nature, etc. Yeah, so how can we cope for a long period? Because that is the aim, isn't it? That we should be able to be good helpers for a longer period, not quit after. So, to repeat myself, it's that we have good realistic demands, not too high, that we have breaks in our work, that we actually try to remember to use art, to see good things, look at good things, to listen to good music, etc. Humor is a very important source for energy. The very famous psychologist or psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived different concentration camps, describes how much humor was a source of energy for people to survive. And then also this sharing with colleagues and with others, and the variation in your work. And then also that you have a feeling of a personal growth and professional growth, that you learn new things, that you feel that you yourself is not only giving, but you are also receiving something. Yes. That was this session, so thank you.